Look at the G20 summit branding. Right below the national insignia, carved into the global stage, is a Sanskrit phrase, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. International organizations and diplomats deploy this phrase across massive assemblies to project an ethos of total global cooperation and erased borders. The standard, universally accepted English translation you will hear is, "The world is one family." But that diplomatic deployment ignores millennia of textual history. Translating the literal words of an ancient language is only the first step. Interpreting their purpose requires looking at the specific textual framework they were born in. Modern commentators often point to this phrase as an ancient Indian blueprint for foreign policy, a guide for how a state should interact with its neighbors. Classical Indian thought does have a highly developed tradition of statecraft, logical survival, and geopolitical strategy. It is called niti. But Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not belong to the literature of niti. It comes from an entirely incompatible domain of thought. The phrase actually originates in the 6th chapter of the Maha Upanishad, a text strictly concerned with metaphysical realization and spiritual liberation, not secular governance. This diagram illustrates these two separate spheres. On one side, the practical calculations of niti. On the other, the cosmic philosophy of Vedanta. Applying a metaphysical absolute about spiritual unity to the physical defense of a nation-state is a category error. Classical authors explicitly warned against doing exactly this. To understand why, we have to look at the exact morphology of the phrase. It breaks down into 3 distinct blocks: Vasudha, Eva, and Kutumbakam. Vasudha translates to earth, or the bearer of wealth. Eva acts as an emphatic marker, meaning indeed or only. This syntactic tree breaks down the final word. Notice the final syllable, the ka suffix. In Sanskrit grammar, this specific suffix often functions as a diminutive. It modifies the root word from family to a small, endearing family. The traditional commentary by the scholar Sadasiva Brahmendra clarifies exactly why the entire earth is described as small. He explains that from a cosmic, fully realized perspective, the vastness of the universe shrinks down. The Earth becomes a tiny, perfectly manageable unit. The phrase does not mean taking your concept of family and expanding it until it fits the globe. It means shrinking the entire significance of the material world within the mind of an enlightened observer. This is why the context of the Maha Upanishad is critical. Chapter 6 is essentially an instruction manual detailing the internal psychology of a fully realized yogi. It describes Brahmi Sthiti, which is the state of ultimate realization where all individual boundaries completely dissolve into a unified whole. The text warns that calculating "this is mine" versus "this is a stranger" is a symptom of a narrow, unrealized mind, what the text calls lagu chetasam. Only those with broad, liberated minds have transcended worldly distinctions of friend, enemy, citizen, or foreigner. Look at this manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita. It contains a parallel concept that reinforces this absolute metaphysical equivalence. The Gita states that a person of true knowledge sees absolutely no difference between a learned scholar, an elephant, a dog, or an outcast. This total equivalence is strictly an internal psychological achievement.
Reaching it requires abandoning all physical, worldly stakes. But what happens when you take that monastic philosophy and apply it to a physical threat? We have to leave the monastery and examine the Niti Shastras. Texts like the Panchatantra were written to teach pragmatism, threat assessment, and survival mechanics in a deeply hostile world. Consider the famous Panchatantra narrative involving 4 traveling scholars walking through a forest who stumble upon a pile of lion bones. 3 of the scholars possess immense technical knowledge, but 0 practical sense. They decide to use their skills to revive the dead apex predator. The 4th scholar, lacking academic credentials but possessing common sense, begs them to stop. When the sensible man argues that a lion is an enemy by nature, the foolish scholar dismisses his warning by directly quoting Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The 4th scholar climbs a tree to save himself. The lion is revived and immediately kills the 3 scholars who refuse to recognize a predator. The classical author uses the fable to make a very specific point.
Utilizing a philosophy of absolute non-duality as an excuse to ignore practical threat assessment is suicidal. We see this exact same critique in another prominent Niti text, the Hitopadesha. Here, the narrative features a deceitful jackal attempting to infiltrate the territory of a highly cautious deer. The deer tries to maintain a defensive taxonomic boundary. To bypass that defense, the jackal recites Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, manufacturing a false sense of trust to completely erase the deer's threat detection. The author deliberately places the highest spiritual axiom in the mouth of a predator. It demonstrates the profound danger of treating a spiritual truth as secular logic. For classical pragmatists, misapplying this phrase is never a sign of enlightened policy. It is the hallmark of terminal stupidity or active deception. This brings us back to the strict epistemological boundary. You have Brahmajana on one side and Niti on the other. Niti operates strictly on the rigid separation of ally, neutral, and adversary. You must define borders to protect them. Brahmajana demands the exact opposite. It requires the complete dissolution of all taxonomic boundaries. A nation-state cannot function in a state of absolute metaphysical realization. A state physically exists to secure specific geography and protect specific citizens. If you erase the distinction between mine and stranger, your military strategy, defense protocols, and foreign leverage instantly crumble. When deployed as a framework for national security or diplomatic negotiation, the phrase functionally fails. That does not mean the phrase lacks value today. It just requires the proper context. For international astronomical societies or organizations dedicated to species-wide scientific advancement, the concept fits perfectly. When the objective is actually universal human unification, divorced entirely from the physical survival of a nation, the Upanishadic ideal is highly appropriate. The power of classical Indian thought lies in its internal logic, a system that demands precision beyond the mere adoption of its vocabulary. True intellectual rigor demands respecting its epistemological boundaries. You have to know the difference between the psychology of the yogi and the duty of the statesman.